Some stories begin with heroes, others with kings. The story of the Santa Maria begins with the sound of hammers, the smell of hot pitch, and the rough texture of freshly cut oak. In the late 15th century, along the northern coast of Spain, between Galicia and Cantabria, dozens of shipyards worked non-stop. The era demanded ships vessels for fishing, for commerce, for war. Here, in one of these busy yards, surrounded by sawdust and stacked timber, a ship was built that no one imagined would one day change the course of history. But the Santa Maria did not start with that name. According to the oldest records, she was first known as La Gallega, the Galician, either because her owner came from Galicia or because her design followed a traditional Galician style. She was, in every sense of the word, an ordinary ship. And maybe that is exactly what makes her story so extraordinary. She wasn't created for exploration. She wasn't designed for danger. She wasn't prepared to sail beyond the known world. She was a cargo vessel, solid, slow, dependable, built to hug coastlines, not to challenge the horizon. That Santa Maria was now a type of ship that represented a transition between medieval vessels and the larger ocean-going ships that would come decades later. She measured roughly 23 to 25 meters in length, about 8 meters across, and displaced somewhere between 100 and 150 tons of weight. Her hull was carved from thick oak, reinforced by curved internal ribs that allowed her to withstand storms and heavy cargo. She carried 3 masts, each with a different type of sail: a large square sail on the mainmast, a triangular lateen sail on the mizzenmast, a smaller square sail on the foremast. This mixture gave her stability but not speed. Historians estimate that, with favorable winds, she could reach 3 to 4 knots. In other words, she was slow, painfully slow. Still, Columbus chose her. Cristóbal Colón, Christopher Columbus, was many things: a skilled navigator, a persuasive dreamer, and a man obsessed with proving the earth could be crossed westward. He also understood risk. He knew that the journey he was proposing was dangerous. So why pick a slow vessel? Why rely on a ship that was never meant to cross an ocean? The answer lies in one word: reliability. The Santa Maria was steady, strong, able to carry more supplies than the smaller, faster caravels. She was a floating fortress, exactly what Columbus needed for a voyage full of unknowns. And there was another reason. Columbus didn't own the Santa Maria letters. She belonged to Juan de la Cosa, one of the most respected sailors in all of Spain, later known as the cartographer who created the first world map to include the Americas. De la Cosa knew the ship better than anyone. He trusted her, and when he agreed to let Columbus use her for the expedition, it added a layer of credibility that few other ships could offer. By the summer of 1492, the shipyard of Palos de la Frontera was transformed into a storm of activity. Beside the Santa Maria stood the 2 caravels that would escort her, the Pinta and the Nina. But all eyes were on the Santa Maria. She would be the flagship. She would carry Columbus, the officers, the navigators, and the essential tools of the expedition. Everything had to be perfect, or as perfect as a 15th century ship could be. Workers reinforced the hull. They resealed the planks with pitch. They strengthened the rigging, replaced worn ropes, and restocked the vessel with enough provisions to last months. The hold was filled with barrels of water and wine, salted meat and fish, dried bread, oil, legumes and nuts, tools, spare wood, nails and tar, gunpowder, crossbows, arquebuses and ammunition, live animals, and gifts meant for unknown peoples. The ship that had once carried goods between nearby ports was now being transformed into the vessel that would attempt something unprecedented. On the night of August 2nd, the Santa Maria rested quietly near the dock, lit only by torches flickering in the coastal wind. Sailors moved about the deck with a mix of confidence and fear. Some prayed, some argued, some stared silently into the darkness, imagining the endless ocean that awaited them. Historical chronicles describe one sailor whispering, "If the sea doesn't kill us, hunger will. But if we return, no one will believe what we've seen." Columbus stood on deck, contemplating the black horizon. He saw not danger but destiny, not monsters but opportunity. For him this voyage was not madness, it was certainty. When dawn broke on August 3rd, 1492, the Santa Maria came alive. Sailors climbed the rigging, orders were shouted, ropes were tightened. The crew braced themselves for something none of them had truly prepared for. Slowly, the ship drifted away from shore, pushed first by oars, then by wind. Behind her, the people of Palos watched in silence. Some made the sign of the cross. Some cried, some whispered that the sea was taking the men to their graves. Ahead lay the unknown. The Nina and Pinta followed, but it was the Santa Maria that led the formation. She was not the fastest, not the most advanced, but she was the strongest, the steadiest, the one capable of carrying the greatest burden. She was the heart of the expedition. Barely out of sight of land, the Santa Maria already revealed her nature. She groaned under the strain of her own weight. The ocean pressed against her hull with force. The wind tugged at the sails, testing every knot, yet she held firm. Columbus in his journal wrote simply, "The wind is good. God guides us." Simple words, but behind them lay tension, fear, and the understanding that the world was about to change. By all appearances, the Santa Maria was an ordinary vessel, one ship among hundreds along the Spanish coast. But as she pushed deeper into the Atlantic that day, she became something else entirely. She became a symbol. She became a gamble. She became the fragile bridge between the old world and the unknown. Her journey had begun, and from that moment forward, the Santa Maria was no longer just a ship. She was the vessel that would carry a dream so bold that, centuries later, we still study every plank, every sail, every decision that shaped her path. That Santa Maria had left the port of Palos, but her story, her true story, was still only beginning. To understand how this ship became a symbol of one of the greatest turning points in human history, we must return once more to the days and hours that surrounded her departure, because the birth of a legend is rarely loud. Most of the time, it is built in silence. In the summer of 1492, Palos de la Frontera was a place divided between ambition and fear. This small Andalusian port, usually filled with fishermen and merchants, suddenly found itself hosting an expedition unlike any other. The villagers had seen ships leave for dangerous journeys before, but nothing that resembled what Columbus proposed. Crossing the ocean sea was not simply risky, it was, too many, a form of tempting fate. Some whispered, "They are sailing into nothing. The sea ends, they will fall into the abyss. Whoever follows that man will never return." And yet, despite the fear, men continued to volunteer. Some for money, some for adventure, some because poverty left them no other choice, a few because they believed Columbus might be right. But one thing was clear, that Santa Maria was the only ship that inspired confidence. Heavy, slow, reliable. She was the vessel that looked strong enough to bring them back, if anything could. While Columbus provided the vision, the Santa Maria's true guardian was Juan de la Cosa, the ship's owner and future cartographer of global fame. He was not a loud man, nor was he known for grand speeches. He was the kind of sailor whose authority came from scars and silence. De la Cosa supervised nearly every detail of the Santa Maria's final preparations. He walked the deck daily, tapping the planks with the back of his knuckles, listening to the shifts in the wood. He inspected the rigging, corrected knots, adjusted beams, and rewrote lists of what needed replacing. To the crew, he was the anchor of Sanatia, man who knew the ship as if it were an extension of himself. One chronicler later wrote, "If Columbus supplied the dream, Juan de la Cosa supplied the reality." Though the Santa Maria already had decades of sailing behind her, she was strengthened for this unprecedented voyage. Workers hammered in new supports beneath the deck. They doubled the rigging ropes, knowing months at sea would test every fiber. Pitch was reheated over open flames and spread across the hull in thick layers to seal even the smallest cracks. The modifications were not elegant. The ship looked heavier, darker, more rugged, but she also looked unbreakably, at least to those who wanted to believe. Inside the hold, the cargo was carefully arranged to maintain balance. Hundreds of liters of water and wine, sacks of flour and dried beans, barrels of salted pork, fish and hardtack carpentry tools and spare timber iron nails, tar rope coils, livestock, goats, pigs, and chickens, chests of weapons and gifts meant for unknown lands and unknown peoples. The Santa Maria was no longer a simple merchant vessel. She had become a floating experiment, half warehouse, half fortress. The night of August 2nd was unusually quiet. Wind barely moved. Torches glowed along the dock, reflecting on the water like trembling stars. The Santa Maria, anchored in the dark, looked tired but resolute. Some sailors slept lightly on deck. Others sat alone, heads bowed, replaying stories they had heard about the unknown sea. Columbus walked the length of the ship several times, pausing often to stare into the blackness. To him, this darkness was not threatening, it was inviting. He believed that beyond that curtain of night, a new world awaited. Historians today still debate whether Columbus truly understood the distance he was about to cross. Some claim he underestimated the size of the earth. Others argue he insisted on shorter estimates to gain royal approval. But on that night, none of those debates mattered. All that mattered was the silence, the waiting, and the knowledge that at sunrise, there would be no turning back. At dawn on August 3, 1492, life returned to the ship with sudden intensity. Sailors climbed the rigging, oars dipped into the water, orders echoed across the deck. The smell of wet rope and fresh pitch filled the air. The people of Palos gathered on the shore to witness what felt like the beginning of something monumental, though most of them didn't know what. Some crossed themselves, some shook their heads, some cried as they watched sons, brothers and husbands disappear into a future no one could predict. Slowly, the Santa Maria drifted from the harbor, the morning light glinting off her newly sealed hull. Behind her followed the Nina and the Pinta, smaller shadows in her wake. The Santa Maria led the way. She carried the expedition's maps, its leaders, its most skilled officers, its heaviest supplies and its heaviest fears. She was not graceful, she was not fast, but she was steady, and sometimes, steady is exactly what history needs. Within hours, land had faded from sight. The smell of the coast was replaced by the raw scent of open water, and the Santa Maria began to creak under the rhythm of the waves, an old ship meeting a new destiny. Columbus wrote in his journal, "We sail with good wind. May God be with us." Simple words, but behind them lay a weight no manuscript could fully capture. As the Santa Maria pushed westward, no one on board, not Columbus, not De la Cosa, not the sailors, understood the scale of the moment. To them, it was a journey. To us, looking back centuries later, it was the beginning of a world transformed. And at the heart of it all was a ship that was never meant to be legendary. A ship built for cargo and routine. A ship that somehow carried the ambitions of kings and the fears of common men. A ship that, in the quiet dawn of August 3, 1492, crossed a threshold that humanity had only dared imagine. The Santa Maria, the impossible, now had set her course, and the world would never be the same.